Just click continue.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, you need to click continue. Okay, so without further ado, I'll just get started. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, just need to put them into slide, in slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Welcome to the first webinar from Business Education ASCILITE SIG. And Colin, we would love to get some more input from you about how we can kind of strengthen our SIG activities from you and Sandy, who are veterans of ASCILITE. So what had happened was when we met at in 2019 in Singapore, we launched our SIG and we agreed that it would be good to have a business education SIG where we focus on challenges that we experience as business educators, specifically large student cohorts, lots of international students, and competition globally as well as locally from TAFE and other sectors. So, and also we experience a particular challenge because unlike medicine and other places, like, in the health sector, we find that scholarship of teaching and learning is recognized, whereas in business schools, there seems to be an obsession with ABDC listed ranked journals. So for example, AJET doesn't surface up very well there. And even now, business schools are going further where BJET is also not accepted. So with all of that in mind, we thought it would be good to have a collective voice and to share with each other what can we do. With that in mind, we launched Business Education SIG. What we agreed was it would be good to have a webinar once in 6 weeks. And this is the first webinar, so it's taken us about 8 months to get organized, but we were also inundated with stuff happening with COVID-19 that we thought, let's just sort out and see how things are going with that. We've set up an MS Teams site. There's not much activity there, but we would encourage all colleagues to join there. Another thing that colleagues have started doing is that if a PhD student who's researching on business education SIG wants to engage other colleagues or get some responses, they've started posting towards that. We are hoping that that will become a more kind of collaborative space for projects to just develop organically. And towards the end of the seminar, Sandy and I can share example of a project that we've been working on. For Brent Gregory, who's also on the organizing committee, he was instrumental in getting us a business education stream at the forthcoming conference. I think this is pretty much it. And the other thing we realized, Amanda is tweeting things, who's also on the steering committee. And today I set up a LinkedIn site because I felt that, LinkedIn is the place these days where people often go. So I'm hoping that organically we'll keep inviting everybody to that. So it's called ASCILITE Business Education Special Interest Group. So to today's seminar, I'm Associate Professor Harsh Suri, and I'm co-facilitating this session with my colleague Friederika, also from Deakin, and Dr. Sandra Barker from University of South Australia. So in today's webinar, first Fred and I'll talk about an ASIN-funded project that we are leading, and then Sandy will talk about her own experiences of leading virtual WIL in UniSA. And Sandy has extensive experience and they've been doing it since 2012. So really it'll be good to hear Sandy's perspective as well. Okay, this is interesting because, okay. Right, it explains because I was on the last slide. It does help if we come to the first slide. So, technology-enabled WIL placements and projects. It all started last year. Fred and I started talking and I said, you know what, Fred, even when people talk about WIL, they often talk of WIL in a local sense. And I think it would be fun to explore how students are engaging with virtual WIL experiences. So we got together, we put together an ASIN-funded project application. We got together with colleagues from RMIT, Leonie Russell, and Associate Professor Annette Marlowe from University of Tasmania. And we had another Deakin colleague, Dr. Wayne Reed. We are very grateful to ASIN for funding our application. So just to provide a bit of a background of our research, what we find in the literature in e-WIL research is that if you look at it from student perspective, so how are they experiencing WIL? Because we really wanted to focus on what are the different experiences students are having. So EWIL is an umbrella term which is used for a lot of different things. Typically, something that's very commonly used is learning materials and modules. So this is an interesting one because, recently our DVC asked me, Harsh, can you just identify what are the virtual WIL opportunities we are using at Deakin? And it was a funny thing. Almost all of our WIL units are coded as online WIL units. And I suspect that's the case with most universities because often for WIL units, we don't require students to come to scheduled classes. And so they get quoted as online in Callista and other systems. But that's not what we're talking about. So we're not talking about virtual WIL where all that students get is we're learning modules and assessment is submitted online or learning modules are offered online. We're not even talking about simulations and immersive learning experiences. We think they are important, and we're not talking about WIL experiences where students are going to the location, for example, say in education or in health clinics, or even in business, students go to different settings, but they interact with university staff or peers through, or other people who are involved in their WIL experience through the LMS. What we wanted to find out was what is student experience like when they interact with host organizations and communities completely online. Why were we interested in this? Because, if you look at the National WIL strategy, it explicitly notices, and even with the Universities Australia audit, that students from equity groups often don't have equitable opportunities to, or even circumstances to participate in WIL. So for example, I lead a team of learning designers and interactive producers in Faculty of Business and Law at Deakin. And at Deakin, we have international students. If they are offered WIL opportunities, then with the new ESOS requirements, it becomes difficult for them because they have to kind of compromise on their paid work experience, and which may not be professional work experience, but it is an important aspect for them. If you think of students from equity groups, they have various equity groups. Many of them have carer responsibilities or they have work commitments due to which they feel that they cannot accommodate completely location-based WIL. So what we wanted to look at was how can we engage students more in virtual WIL experiences, which make it more lucrative for students from equity groups to participate. And for all our students, it also means that they can participate in more global virtual WIL experiences. So with that in mind, how did we define it? So in our project, we defined virtual WIL or online WIL, or as Sandy would say, remote WIL, as an environment where option of placement or major industry communicating, where the project or all interactions related to the project with the industry or host organizations were happening online. So this means that the industry people are involved in giving the project brief online. They are providing supervision. They are providing feedback. All of that is happening completely online. And just to share an anecdote, so, this project's been going on since the beginning of, since the mid of last year. And in our earlier presentations, I remember Fred and I presented, and we had a whole room full of colleagues who said, but, virtual WIL is not real WIL because students miss out on a lot. And so what their logic was that when students go to a particular location to participate in WIL, they become apprentices there. They learn a lot by being in that environment. And guess what? Since COVID-19, what we are finding is that the world has changed. The work world has changed. So even at work, people are learning different ways of participating. So even within business sectors, people are working from home. Global virtual teams are on the rise. And almost all of us every day in the morning wake up and we have this experience of working in a global virtual team. Even if it's not global, it feels like a global virtual team. So while we were doing this project, we felt that the world had changed, and we can't think of virtual will as not real will, or in some ways an inferior form of will. It actually has become real will because the workplace is changing. So this should not, I do not know why it keeps jumping here. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand it over to my colleague, Fred, who will share a resource that we have produced, an interim report, an interim guide for. So Fred, I've stopped sharing. You can share your slides. So Fred's going to talk through key insights that we gained from talking to various colleagues and from looking at the literature. And what we did was, led by Fred, we produced a resource for will practitioners on how they can design good will experiences. Fred, I'll hand it over to you now.
You're on mute.
You're muted, Fred. Yeah.
Fred, you're muted right now. Fred, you're sharing the screen, but you're muted.
I like talking to myself. It's interesting to see even in the group today that people have been practicing online will for quite a time. So this is not new. We were looking into it because it was becoming increasingly an option for people, and particularly, as Harsh said, in relation to international students and other, equity groups. So the first thing, and I think that little graphic that Hirsch showed about skepticism among some academics about the value of online will, then COVID happened and we're all now doing so much online. So the value proposition for students and industry is a really important point. We hear in the sort of student community that, some are frustrated with having just online options for classes as opposed to face-to-face, whereas, some universities, particularly Deakin in particular, but I know others as well, we've been offering online classes for a very long time. And, at times this has been a blended version or a hybrid version. So I think we still have a job in front of us to convince everyone of the value proposition, both the students, but also industry organisations who might now be thinking, oh, I can't take a student because, this isn't going to be a good experience. I might just take a step backwards and say, this guide or these considerations that we've put together are really an interim guide. We haven't finished the research. We've done some of the research, but when COVID happened, we suddenly had a great call for people going, oh, can you give us some information? So in a way, this guide is not geared for the experienced will practitioner, online will practitioner. It's really for people who are newly coming into that fold. So to many of you here, what we've got in the guide, you're doing anyhow. Then the first step really is to determine what's going to be on offer to the students. Is it going to be a placement, or is it going to be a major project where students have direct interaction with the host organisation? And that really depends on the relationship that you have with the organisation. So you might have an existing relationship, which you would then renegotiate. And we've seen that. We've seen telehealth taking off, and you know, we might have even been participants in telehealth, so that, you know, health students, or you know, in various forms, are now working with their organisational practitioners in offering, you know, telehealth. But it's also an opportunity to seek out new relationships with organisations, you know, just as they've had to change how they run their operations. There are opportunities, and if we're thinking about sort of in the business sector, you know, they need new marketing plans, they need new capability in on their online sites, they need a whole lot of new sort of, you know, business related changes that are now sort of captured and offered online. So it's a particularly great opportunity for business students. And just the general due diligence that you have in partnering with organisations, clarifying the roles, responsibilities and expectations of all parties, addressing all those insurance, privacy, legal requirements. And most likely your universities already have systems set up for all of this. Then, of course, a critical factor is good curriculum design. Now, I have seen some examples of industry projects that do not meet good pedagogical design. You know, they're not necessarily aligned with learning outcomes. You know, they're not designed as a deep learning experience for students. So paying attention to good pedagogical practice is critical. And it underpins all the work that we do anyhow. And one aspect of that's particularly important is the assessment. We shouldn't be offering students an assessment in their placement or project that they can do on their desktop. You know, what's the purpose of them having the project or the placement with an organisation, you know, having the interactions, you know, observing things about the culture of the organisation, or the, you know, the processes or the operations, you know, and then just offer them an assessment that they can do overnight on the desktop. So assessment design in online WIL ideally incorporates the experiences that the students are having with the host organisation. You know, and that might be a reflective practice piece. You know, it might be some reference, you know, to the organisation, so that students are not only explicitly embedding what they're learning in the organisation, but there might also be some sort of, you know, implicit learning there. And we haven't included it, but I will dig it out for you. Rola Ajawi from Deakin and David Bowd and a couple of other people have just developed a resource for WIL assessment. That's excellent. And maybe we can circulate that afterwards. Part of, and again, I'm speaking to people who are already doing this, you know, providing the preparation, providing the support while the students are on placement or projects, and then debriefing with them. So communication, these are a little bit out of sync. So communication, the research has shown, is what's often lacking in placements, and particularly communication between the university and organisation. So a lot of time gets spent in setting up the structure and the project or the assignment, and then that's it. And organisations have complained, you know, then we never hear from the university again. So setting up a you know, a forum for regular communication between the university and organisation is recommended. But most critical is actually the social presence and communication for students. You know, as we're Zooming every day for hours and hours, it's really, really important that students feel connected, that these Zoom interactions with the host organisation avail them of a real connection and a real sense of, you know, belonging and attachment, because that serves as a great motivator for students. And so one of the recommendations that has come out is to set up some forums for students so that they can not only interact with their supervisor or their colleague in the host organisation, but other people in the organisation. So could they set up some, you know, coffee groups, or a, you know, informal meeting for 10 minutes, or, you know, for 15 minutes, you know, meeting other department personnel. So, you know, increasing the communication within the host organisation, but also enabling the students to communicate with each other. So they'll all be on different placements, all be doing different projects, setting up a forum where they can come together and share some of that information. So they're learning from each other, they're problem solving, they're supporting while they're on the job. And during the COVID times, this is really critical because many students are going to feel very isolated. And we're seeing that already. Oh, and then what I've skipped over there was working safely from home. And that is really sort of impressing upon the students that, you know, they treat this like a job. You know, they're no longer, this isn't just a school catch up with your colleagues. This is a professional working environment, and, you know, setting up protocols about behaving professionally online. And a critical aspect of that, of course, is cybersecurity. I mean, in the past, we've never really addressed cybersecurity. You know, we've sort of skimmed around the edges a bit of, you know, having some safe practices online. But as we read in the press, you know, we now have to have a heightened sense of cybersecurity risks, particularly for the organisation. And the organisation may well require certain things of students in that regard and may train them, etc. But also for themselves as they develop into professionals. And then finally, of course, evaluating the program and doing this in a number of ways. Maybe the debriefing might have some feedback and evaluation component, but then also formally evaluating the project or placement, you know, from the student's perspective, but also from the organisational perspective, getting that feedback and then using that for, you know, review and renewal. So I will draw breath now. And, oh, no, not yet. I'll draw breath for a minute and then continue. So I'm just going to skim over these. We're also looking at considerations from industry partners and considerations for students. So these are just some of the preliminary area that we've sort of identified through the desktop research so far.
Thank you so much, Fred. This is, I think at this point, it would be good if we kind of hand it over to Sandy. And a lot of the stuff that Fred talked about has also been, we've just published it as an interim report for ASIN, and it's on the ASIN website. I've shared the link on the chat. Sandy, perhaps we could hand it over to you at this point.
Sure.
Fred, yeah.
Hi, so I'm just going to talk about the experiences I've had over the past 10 years or so since coming into this space, although I've been teaching here at UniSA since 2000. I didn't really get involved in my first placement course until 2010 when I took over some existing placements that were being offered only to our human resource management students and made them available to the entire cohort in our business unit. So 2010 was my first introduction. We had about 4 students in our first placement. It's all elective based. And then in 2012, I encountered my first instance of a virtual or remote placement where I had a student based in Whyalla in country South Australia who also travelled to a very remote work site in a fly-in, fly-out situation, and she was studying HR. And we found we got offered a placement from an HR consultant in Perth. And therefore, we linked them up. They were Skyping at that point to have their meetings, and she produced a wonderful set of materials that had been required by the consultant as part of her project, and learnt a lot along the process, and so did we. Since then, we've had quite a number of these type of placements, primarily where with small not-for-profit organisations, where the not-for-profit organisation doesn't have an office, and therefore they have no opportunity to have them to come into an office on a daily basis. So they organise meetings in different places, but mostly online. In 2015, we established our support unit, which I led for the first couple of years. And then we developed a suite of placement courses. We now have 9 elective placement courses in the business unit across undergraduate and postgraduate. They vary in length from a standard 4.5 or 1 course, single unit course, up to what we call an 18 unit course, which is a equivalent to a full semester of teaching or 4 courses towards their degree. It does use up all of their electives, but it is an entire 6 month or 3.5 month placement. So we have a wide range of options for the students, but as I said, they are all elective, with the exception of 1 course, which is run primarily for our sport and recreation students, and it is core in their program in second year. In 2018, we employed a full-time partner manager to manage the internship, and their role is to source internships. And we have a couple of support staff under that do all of the administrative work behind the placements. And then, of course, this year we hit COVID-19, and I'll talk more about that response that we had there. What we found important in the virtual WIL area is to make clear connections with the organisations. and a lot of the stuff that I've listed here on this slide, we do anyway. But when it comes to the virtual and what we experienced over the last 3 or 4 months, the absolute necessity, as Fred was just saying about communication and clear expectations, is essential. So ensuring regular updates between both the student and the organisational supervisor, between the student and our academic mentors, between the program engagement and the organisation as well. The truths that have become clear, particularly over the last 3 months, are the necessity for clear expectations, both of the organisation and the student, and a very explicit project brief or understanding of what it is that is required of the student. We don't let any placement go live until such time as we have vetted exactly what business is looking at providing for the student in terms of their project. So the sort of process we go through: pre-placement, students obviously enrol, they get to apply, we get the project briefs, we advertise them, students can self-source placements. Even if they self-source those placements, we need to approve a project brief. If they're not self-sourced, they go through an interview process. All students now across the university undertaking work integrated learning, whether it's business or elsewhere, have to complete 3 compulsory pre-placement modules before their first placement. And that's health, education, engineering, all areas of the university have to complete these 3 modules. They're very generic, but they talk about things like the requirements of undertaking a safe student placement. We look at respectful behaviour and exploitation, workplace rights and workplace responsibilities. There is a fourth module in the wind at the moment. Each of those modules are sequential. You can't get to the second one before you've completed the first one, and you need to get 80% in a quiz on that module before you can advance, and you can't receive your signed placement agreement until those modules are completed and the certificate is submitted. Before students go out on placement, they also meet with their academic mentor to ensure that they are ready for placement and they know what is required. During the placement, we have the student is expected to have regular supervisor meetings. We get them to document those so that we know that they're chatting with them on a regular basis. We have academic mentor meetings at the 1/3 and 2/3, so 1/3 the way through the placement and then 2/3 the way through the placement. And at the halfway point, we get a progress report from the students, which is a reflective piece, in which they reflect on what it is that they've been doing. These are 3rd-year students or mid-course postgraduate coursework students. That progress report gets them to reflect on the goals that they've set themselves, how they're progressing, what sort of interactions they're having with the organisation that will improve their employability in the future, and those sorts of things. And then post-placement, we get a clarification of their hours, a signed timesheet by the supervisor that ensures that the student have completed the required number of hours, and that's virtually or face-to-face. The students produce a final report on their achievements for the organisation and a video reflection on how they have achieved their learning, so what they personally have learnt out of the process and how they will be able to incorporate that in any future employment. We get a host student evaluation, where the host evaluates the student against a number of criteria, primarily in the areas of our graduate qualities, or we call them enterprise skills. contributes a significant amount to their final grade. So it's where, because the host is the one that's seen them all the time, and what they have achieved for the organisation impacts on their grade quite significantly. And we have an exit survey that they get from the administrative unit, and often I'll have a meeting with the students to see what they've actually been able to achieve and if there's anything that we can do to improve the process. So COVID-19 issues that we experienced, well, we call them study periods, and our main semester one is called study period 2. We had about 85 students enrolled across the courses, and about half of those withdrew due to COVID-19 issues. A number of them were international students that were stuck overseas and couldn't get back to undertake their placements. And others were students that were so concerned about COVID-19 that they didn't want to undertake a placement at that time. Of the remaining 45 or so placements we had, students we had, 31 hosts withdrew their placement offering. 7 students withdrew because they didn't want to undertake a remote placement. 2 students transferred hosts, and 3 put their placement on hold and are just starting again now, because we're in the fortunate situation that we are here and organisations have gone back to face-to-face. In study period 4, which is our winter school, which is done over an 8-week period, 100% of our placements were remote, and I don't know what the numbers were, but they certainly were 100%. Moving into the study period that's just started, and we started this week, so this is day 2 of week 1, and almost all of our placements are face-to-face. We have a few remote, but primarily they are in a face-to-face mode. So we've moved through the crisis at the moment, but there are certainly some other things that we are investigating that we can see what has happened. So the options that we've had, most of our placements are outsourced, but one of the things that we've become keenly aware of is the fact that it's so very difficult, as I'm sure most people experience, to get organisations to undertake student placements. So we've started working within the university, particularly at the administrative units of the university, to undertake in-house placements. We've had a number of accounting or commerce-based placements, logistics, procurement, HR placements held within the in-house units of the university, and that has given us the opportunity to have a lot of these virtual placements or remote placements undertaken, even though they were in-house, because we were locked down like everybody else. They still got the opportunity to do those placements. The top right and bottom left corners are a bit of my concern about our terminology, remote versus virtual. Where are we going with virtual placements? Are we going the way of having that virtual environment that we can move into through virtual reality software? But most of them seem to be through Zoom meetings or equivalent processes. And surprisingly, a number of the placement catch-ups between students and their host organisations has actually just been over the phone rather than in any other form. So that's pretty much it for my experience. I'm happy to answer questions. I've seen the chat dropping up with lots of other things. I'm not sure where we're at, but I'm happy to answer any questions, as I'm sure Harsh and Fred are, about what we've spoken about this morning.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And Fred, perhaps we could open it up to questions. So one of the two things, perhaps if I can make a couple of comments, what I really liked was when I was in a discussion with Sandy, and she said, I always ask my students that, you know what, make sure that you mention in your CV that you have been doing an online WIL or a WIL, you've been part of a global virtual team, because that is what is going to be the future like. And two things that we think have surfaced up in talking to colleagues who've been involved in this space is students are learning how to interact professionally in an online environment. So in terms of, setting up, and most of them are going to have virtual or online job interviews or online will placement interviews. And the way the world is moving, a lot of stuff is going to happen online. So it's an important skill that students are developing. The other thing that Fred's very passionate about, and I think it is a very important thing, is about cybersecurity. So helping students understand how do you present yourself professionally and responsibly in an online environment is surfacing up a lot.